Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's not Tech Tuesday today. It's Thursday, so we're going to call it Tech Thursday. And with me today is Travis Abrams from UNS. And we are going to be talking about cybersecurity today. And specifically, the topic today will be about USDA ReConnect. But this really also applies if you're an internet service provider or even a state that wants to know more about cybersecurity and broadband. This will apply if you're going to be looking to get BEAD funding, ACAM, Enhanced ACAM, and then just in general, if you're an ISP, more than likely within the next year or two, you're going to have cybersecurity in place because of other federal initiatives. Since broadband operators, telecommunications companies are considered critical infrastructure, this is something that we're going to be seeing across the board, not to mention insurance. A lot of insurance policies are looking at this now. But again, today we're going to talk specifically about USDA ReConnect. But a lot of this all applies to the other federal funding programs, and again, just in general for the safety of your network and just the future that you're going to be seeing requirements in. So, Travis, I'm going to go ahead and we want to bring up your first slide. Whoops, I think I lost your slide. Hang on, I'll add it back. There we go. So here's what we're going to talk about today. So the agenda, cyber requirements for ReConnect. So we're going to talk about that. The USDA ReConnect program, that is a program designed to provide broadband funding in rural areas. It's through the Department of Agriculture. So we're going to talk about those requirements. Again, very similar, if really pretty much the same as you would find for BEAD funding. We're going to talk about intro to security frameworks. That's where we're going to kick it off with Travis, and he's going to go through what a security framework is, why that's beneficial. And we're going to talk about the core components of specifically the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is the reference for this that's going to be used for USDA ReConnect as well as BEAD. Implementation of that and deployment options, and also how we can help. So make sure you stay tuned for that, because this can be a little challenging for operators, especially smaller to mid-sized operators, to get all of this stuff done on your own. So Travis, if you'll go to the next slide, we'll talk about what's required here. So you can see here that it talks about cybersecurity and risk management, and it mentions specifically this cybersecurity for critical infrastructure control systems is what it's going to be based on, or the current draft of these goals found and then there's a URL there. And that agency, by the way, is the same one that is looking at in the future having all communications operators, broadband operators, whatever, have these same policies applied to them, whether they're taking funding or not. So that's the agency that's in charge of that. And you see here, this is directly from their page, that they're going to be following the NIST framework, the NIST cybersecurity framework. So you see the 6 core functions of that. And if you're looking at it and you go, wait, what's that first one, govern? Well, that was newly added, so we're going to be talking today about version 2.0 of the framework. So you see there, these are the same, what's mentioned here as far as USDA ReConnect are the same core functions that are in the NIST framework, so therefore it's all going to be pretty much focused on the same things. So CISA is not reinventing the wheel, and they are going to be following the same framework that we have for NIST. So Travis, I'll turn it over to you, and you can talk a little bit about why frameworks and then move on from there.
Yeah, thank you, Rick, and thanks for having me on today to talk about this. It's an exciting topic. The first thing to really understand is what is a framework and why? Why do we need to have a plan? Why is the government, requiring this in order to get the funding? And really, it's about having something to measure yourself against. Effective cybersecurity is more than technology. Now, when we think of cybersecurity, often the first thing that comes to mind is your anti-malware or a firewall or things like that. But really, it's about your people, your processes, and then your technology. So for people, you need to have the right people in the right seats. So do you have people that can manage your cybersecurity tools and technologies? Do you have the right people that can help guide the company, and are your executive actively involved in the cybersecurity process? And then making sure you're training your individuals. At the end of the day, your staff, your help desk, your customer service representatives. Those are going to be people on the front line of cybersecurity. They're going to often be the first ones to detect something's wrong in the environment, or they're going to be the ones that are being targeted by phishing attacks and different types of attacks. So you want to make sure your people are trained, that you're educating them, that you have the right people to manage the technologies and things you have in place. And the second is about processes.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have the right process in place. And, this can be everything from, simply documenting all of your core applications or the business applications that are critical to your organization, and all the way to having a process defined around how do you manage user accounts? How do you respond to threats when there is an attack? You don't want to be figuring it out every time uniquely. You want to have a process for that because it will happen. So you want to have that. And then, of course, you want to have the right technology. And you don't want to have technology for the sake of having it. You want it to be targeted. You want it to fill specific gaps. And you want to grow through this process as you go.
So, like people is interesting because I know that's probably one of the biggest challenges and costs maybe, let's say on the people that would actually be in charge of cybersecurity. So there's two parts there, right? You need the people there to be able to, manage all this technology, keep watch. Really, it's got to be 24/7 because, nothing good happens at night. And then you've got the people, like you said, I mean, there's, everybody in the company could be a potential vector, right, for these things. And they need to be trained on what to do and what not to do, maybe more important, what not to do. So those are two key things I see there, maybe even more. I mean, the technology is very important, but people, I think, is a big part of it. And then, of course, the process is what controls that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we unfortunately see often is organizations focus on the technology too much. They think that if they deploy the most recent next generation product or whatever that is, that suddenly now they have cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. The reality is it is a process and it requires all of these. You can have the best technology in the world, but if you don't have the right people monitoring it, looking at it, then it's not going to help you, right? And we've seen this, over time, in many situations. Also, a lot of smaller organizations are not going to be able to afford to build out a dedicated security team. It's just too expensive. There's many job shortages in the field. Like to your point, it does often require 24/7 monitoring. So building that out can be very costly, and it just doesn't make sense for some organizations. So that's where finding partners and augmenting partners with existing staff is going to really be the best way to accomplish it.
Very good.
Yeah. So frameworks also provide a guide. So if you think about, implementing a new solution, if you don't have a way to measure it, then you don't know how well you're doing. So that's why NIST chose the cybersecurity framework. And this gives you a very laid out process that any organization can follow. And now you have a roadmap. You have a way to tell what you're doing right now, what your biggest gaps are, and then even a long-term goal where you can have a structured program that you can follow. This is going to be easy to show executives, partners, other people, how you're maturing over time, in your journey with a security program. Also, some frameworks do require third-party certification. So many of you have probably heard of PCI for credit cards. That has a lot of specific requirements around third-party audits and certifications, or HIPAA for healthcare. ISO is another one that requires a third party to come in and certify you. So the NIST cybersecurity framework does not require that. So you just have to be able to show that you have the right processes in place, policies, technologies in place for that. But it does not require an outside third party to come in and sign off and say, yes, you're secure.
So I don't know if there's any, so there's no oversight of that somebody doesn't come and verify, is that right?
That is right. And you don't, and some of these other ones, you have to pay a third party to say, yes, you're doing good. So there's an extra cost for that, of course, right? So they're not doing this right now. Now, that doesn't mean that the ReConnect program and the BEAD program do not have methods in place to request proof of your certification. So they're very well are going to audit organizations and probably do it randomly, to make sure that if you commit, if you sign off on your security plan, that you're following certain processes or implementing certain technologies, whatever that looks like, you're going to need to prove it, right? So you want to be ready for that.
Yeah, and of course, the worst consequence is something happens, how it impacts your business and your subscribers. So there's that consequence hanging out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, and you mentioned this earlier, Rick, regardless of whether organizations are getting BEAD funding or the ReConnect program, having this cybersecurity plan and process is really becoming just standard operating procedures for organizations. If you want to get cybersecurity insurance to protect your company, you're going to have to implement many of the processes and technologies that you're going to do throughout this program anyway. So this is really designed as a best practices that really all organizations can follow. And with that, I'll talk a little bit more specifically about NIST. So why NIST? So first, NIST implements a common language, right? There's a common set of terms, there's controls, there's different items that they refer to that are going to be well recognized across industries. So government industries, global companies have followed the NIST framework. So when you speak to others about following the NIST framework and how you're implementing the controls and the different items of it, it's going to be very common among everyone. Everyone's going to understand what you're talking about, right? And that's important. So if you do get audited or you have a cybersecurity insurance company that wants to know how you're doing cybersecurity, and you mentioned you're following NIST cybersecurity framework and you along this journey, they're going to understand it, they're going to get it, and it's going to help you. It's also flexible. So even with the new version of the NIST CSF 2.0 that came out in February, they made a lot of updates to it. And you mentioned one, Rick, with the new govern section, but there's even others. And one of those is really additional flexibility. So it's not a one size fits all. Not every control or every requirement that's listed is going to make sense for every organization. So you have the ability to define what makes sense for your company and for your maturity in order to still be compliant with it. For example, asset management. Asset management is going to look completely different for a company that has 10 devices versus a company that has 10,000, right? So they're not seeing how you have to implement it. You don't have to go buy a costly software program to manage all your assets if it doesn't make sense for your organization. But you need a process. A spreadsheet would be sufficient for a small organization, right? That tracks every asset, who owns it, what function it provides. So there's a lot of flexibility in the implementation of this that's going to be a lot flexible for every company. Also, as I mentioned earlier, it aligns with best practices. There is nothing being required in this that is extraordinary or above and beyond. They're not looking at every company as a Department of Defense or military organization that needs really stringent security practices. So this is best practices. It's ensuring you identify what assets you have in your organization. You know your data, where it's stored. You have a process for managing users. You have a way to detect threats and to respond to that. That's really what it's about. It also allows for collaboration. There are techniques and policies and procedures built into it that allows organizations to communicate to each other. With the govern section that was recently added, they're really adding a section now for senior management, for business leaders. Too often, cybersecurity is driven from the bottom up, where you have engineers or IT or people like that trying to push executives to make decisions around cybersecurity in order to get funding. Now with the govern section, it's really requiring executives and boards to have some kind of input around cybersecurity and to really make it clear to the organization that they are on board with ensuring that the company is implementing the best practices. Okay, and then regulatory compliance, NIST maps with many, many other frameworks. So as I mentioned earlier, there are other security frameworks. There is PCI, HIPAA, and ISO, and others. And it's possible that some people will have to comply with multiple frameworks, right? We've run into that many times. So the great thing is NIST can be mapped to all the other frameworks. So if you already are meeting certain compliance requirements, there's a very good chance you can take those same items you're doing, map them directly to the NIST controls, and now you're not having to do something over again, right? There's no repetition. And really, it's all about continuous improvement. And for many of you that are trying to get the ReConnect funding or BEAD or any of those programs, and you're just starting with this, you're not going to get everything implemented, in a month. This is a journey, right? So what you want to do is really focus on the core items, and we'll talk more about that. And then, go through those and then do a continuous improvement. So year over year, you're assessing yourself, you're, making strategic decisions over what you're going to implement in the next steps.
So that brings up a question. So I think the application deadline for USDA ReConnect is May 21st. So, if somebody is just joining us today, or maybe they watch the recording tomorrow or the next few days, are they still, I guess they're still able to put something together. They won't, like you say, they won't be able to implement everything or deploy everything, but they can at least get a start. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And at least with the BEAD funding, we've been helping organizations put together their security plans. Mm-hmm. And those security plans generally highlight what they're doing now and also what their future plans are, right? So I don't think BEAD or the ReConnect is going to expect organizations to have every single control implemented, everything done, especially for smaller operators. Yeah. But you need to show a plan. You need to show that you've made some investment, you took the time, put in the effort to at least understand where you're at, meet some of the obvious goals and challenges that need to be implemented, but then you have a plan of how you're going to develop that over time.
Right.
A little bit about NIST. It is defined by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Again, it was created in response to increasing cybersecurity threats. So initially, it was focused around government entities that were non-critical, but now it's really been expanded to including all of government, private industries, critical infrastructure. And again, the goal is to provide that common language and that structured approach. And that's what's so important, is that you have a structured approach of how you're going to address, manage, and reduce your cybersecurity risks. So it's not dependent upon one individual's decision or how they may feel about it. It takes kind of some of that emotion out of the process and allows organizations to very effectively focus on, goals and outcomes that they can work towards. It also has wide acceptance, as we mentioned, both in the United States and internationally. It's really become a standard for cybersecurity risk. And now with the 2.0 version, not only did they add additional areas we talked about, but they have also added the govern section as well. Okay. So it looks like.
Oh yeah, I think that's the older version.
1 second. Can I switch that, Rick, real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll bring us back here. So, yeah, so we had a couple of things out of order there. So yeah, that's interesting. So the framework really, as you're saying, for anybody would be kind of a place to tell you everything that you need to do. And it goes into a lot of detail. So one thing I'll do, I don't think I put a link on there now, but I will go ahead and link when we're done with this broadcast, just in the description, I'm going to put a link to the 2.0 framework so that folks can go look at that. It looks, it's very daunting when you look at it, but it is very well organized. You've got the different core functions that Travis is going to go through, and then you've got categories under that, and then under the categories, you've got even more specifics on what they all mean. And Travis is going to cover some of that today, which I think will give you a good head start on understanding that. So,
yep. I apologize for that, everyone. So,
all right,
we have 6 core areas of the NIST framework, and previously there were 5. So, as we talked about before, there was only the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Now we have govern, and the idea of govern is really to develop a strategy. So, this is where your policies are going to be. All your different security policies. This is where you're going to have buy-in from senior management, maybe some statements about their involvement in cybersecurity, how they're going to ensure that the organization is moving that forward. And they're going to communicate that to the entire company. So we're going to ensure that the message is coming from top down in the organization. And so you're going to have more buy-in that way. The next phase is your identify. And with identify, you really need to understand what you have. So think about it as knowing what assets you have. How is your subscriber network configured? What are all the devices that make up that network? Where is your sensitive data stored? Do you have a full tracking asset list of all of your laptops, desktops, network equipment, all that information that you can reference when you need to? If you don't know what you have, then it's hard to protect it, right? I can't protect data if I don't know where it's at. I can't protect assets and servers and devices if I don't know where they're located and I don't know what is running on them, so I can make sure I'm implementing the right security controls, right? And then you move into your protection phase. And with that, you're developing safeguards to actually protect against attacks. So think of firewalls, network segmentation, multi-factor authentication. This is your more technical sections, right, with the products you're involved in purchasing. And then you have your detection capabilities, because remember, protecting it is not the same as detecting it. So you can have attacks happening, but you don't know they're happening. Mm-hmm. So you want to also implement detection capabilities. And this is also referred to as continuous monitoring. You'll see that a lot. And so in this, you have a process in place to identify security threats in a timely manner. So you're getting notified when there are a certain number of failed login attempts. You're getting notified when malware is detected or trying to execute on an endpoint. And this is often where companies struggle because it takes a lot of effort to look at every event that's being generated by your tools. And most organizations aren't 24/7. Mm-hmm. So this is where having a third party, and this is a good phase to really look at partnering with a third party, because they can provide that after hours monitoring, that 24/7 alerting. Somebody else can review those threat events, rule them out, what are false positives or maybe what aren't critical, and then elevate the ones that need immediate, response. And then respond is the next section, and that's really about how do you develop a plan to respond to a security incident. Many companies, unfortunately, stop at the protect phase. They think, well, if I buy this endpoint security or I buy this, firewall or this new tool, I'm not going to have security incidents. The reality is you will. Mm-hmm. So you need to have a plan in place of how to respond to threats. This could be everything from who are our critical partners that we need to call, right? So if your email system is down, how do you reach your partners? Do you have phone numbers written down somewhere, right? Who are the executives that need to be notified if there's a security event? Do you have cybersecurity insurance? And do you need to contact them before you take actions? who needs to contact them. So having that written response plan is going to be critical. This is also something usually a partner can help you with, because if you have a third party helping with the monitoring, they're often helping with the response side too. Now, they can't do it all because there's going to be unique needs for every organization. So partnering with someone will be very important here, but it has to be a partnership between any third parties and the organization themselves. And then the last area is recover. And this is really, how do you recover from those cybersecurity events? Think your backups, off-site, one-site backups, failover sites, failover redundancy of equipment. This all falls underneath there. But it's not just the technology. Remember, it's the processes around how to do it. If you needed to restore 5 servers tomorrow, would you be able to do it? Do you have the right people? Do you have the processes written down? Do you have all of that in place? So you don't want to be trying to find the right login or the right credentials or to log into something or the instructions on how to do it. If you're in this situation, it's going to be stressful enough. You need to have a playbook that you can grab and that you'll be able to reference throughout the process.
Yeah, so really what you're trying to do here is, I guess you're starting by locking the door, not just leaving the door open. You lock the door, but even that will not prevent everybody from breaking into your house, whatever. And then you have to have methods to, to have further protection. And then here, what you're saying as far as recovery, the longer your network is down, the longer you're impacted, the worse for your business. So the quicker you can recover from this, the better, right? So that can save them money and the reputation as well.
Yeah, and what we've seen in talking to a lot of organizations have invested into the recover section, especially when ransomware attacks started becoming extremely prevalent. A lot of organizations really started focusing on offsite backups, cloud-based backups, also backing up systems much more frequently versus like the traditional, I'll do a weekly backup. Now, some companies do hourly backups of critical data. But here's the area that most fail at, and that is actually testing those recovery systems. So, question for all of you to think about: when was the last time you actually tested restoring sensitive, critical data to your environment, right? When was the last time you failed over your firewalls or network devices just to make sure it works? So you want to do that. You don't want to be in a situation where you realize there's some misconfiguration or something not functioning correctly when you're trying to restore your data.
Good point.
To go into a little more detail, this gives you a little more information of the category. So underneath each function of the 6 functions, you have individual categories. And then beneath those categories, you may further have individual controls. And we won't read all of these to you, but you can see with the NIST 2.0, they also updated these to be a little more easy to read and implement and understand. So under protection, now you have specific sections for awareness and training, right? So it's a lot simpler. One area I want to point out here, though, is under govern. And that's the cybersecurity supply chain risk management. This is one area that is separate. And if you look at like the BEAD funding applications and some of those, it was listed as a separate requirement. But now the cybersecurity supply chain is included under CSF 2.0. That's helpful, but it's still very confusing for organizations, because if you're not building products or you're not a software developer, then what is supply chain to you, right?
Yeah.
And so it's high level, simple areas where companies can comply with this, and where you want to be thinking about is, do you know what all of your providers do for cybersecurity? So if you have a firewall vendor, do you know what their process is for responding to threats? Recently, there was some major vulnerabilities in Palo Alto firewalls that allowed outside attackers to gain access. Palo Alto responded well by releasing information about the threat, even calling customers that they thought were at risk, and responding to that. So that's one example. But if you have other vendors that are very important to your ability to serve your customers, you want to maintain a list of those organizations. You want to reach out to them and say, hey, send me your cybersecurity plan, right? What is your certification? Because many of these organizations are going to have SOC 2 certifications. They're going to have publicly available cybersecurity response plans, right? So you want to understand those. You want to gather them. If you have a smaller organization that's critical to your company and they don't have a cybersecurity plan, you need to be asking them why, right? And for some companies, it could even result in you needing to look at other organizations to provide those services, right? That's really what the supply chain risk management is going to look like for most of the providers that are going to be interested in the ReConnect funds, because most of you are not creating your own software or hardware, but you still are part of the supply chain with cybersecurity.
And does it?
The other area is implementing security around the products you own. So NIST has released a set of categories of the types of software that need to be managed. And those are things like security software that has access to every machine. You know, are you keeping that up to date? Is it secure to gain access to it? Things like that. So this is an area we've helped clients kind of build out plans for, because again, it can be confusing, but it is a core requirement, and it is absolutely something that BEAD and ReConnect are going to be looking for in your security plans, is to make sure that you have addressed the cybersecurity supply chain areas.
Question about that. So is it the supply chain just as far as where they touch your technology? For example, somebody that has access to your network, or as you mentioned, maybe equipment or something like that. Is that what you're primarily concerned about when we're talking about our supply chain?
It's that, but it's also even the vendors of the products you're using. So again, if you're using, certain software package, from a vendor, and that software is very critical. Maybe it's a billing application for you to bill your subscribers. You really need to understand from them, hey, what's your cybersecurity plan, right? How are you treating cybersecurity so that, this software is available, especially cloud providers, right? So if it's a cloud provider, well, what are they going to do if their cloud is attacked, their environment's attacked? What's their redundancy plan? What is their recovery plan, right? So you want to be asking that of all of your vendors.
So basically those things that are kind of mission critical for you, the vendors that are involved in that. Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Something else here that, with this govern, and it's described well here in this image on the right, is that this is kind of what encompasses everything from start to finish. So you start the process, and then you go through everything, and then you have the feedback at the end, right? Yep. And then you make improvements. Is that what they're trying to show there?
Yep, absolutely. And again, remember, if having, your organization, your executives, having the right policies, the procedures, the right roles, responsibilities in place is really what's going to set the stage for everything else, right, within the NIST framework. So having, the govern resolved correctly and set up right is going to allow it to be easier to implement products you may need to purchase, right? Or implement procedures or changes to the environment that are going to be easier to do if you have executive buy-in, from the top to help implement these items. Yeah. And then some of the others, again, we'll talk about briefly, is the identity. Again, that's really about, again, your asset management. Do you know where your devices are, where your data is? Have you assessed the risk of all of those devices, the operating systems, hardware? Are you running unsupported routers in your subscriber network, right? That could be a big issue. You need to know that, right? And then you want to develop ways to protect that. One of those is going to be authentication, and it's going to be training your people, as we talked about earlier, security, technical implementations of products, generally at this. Into the detect phase, again, you're going to have your continuous monitoring and your adverse event analysis. So this is going to be either an internal group or an external group that's going to be monitoring all of those tools that are listed under the protect section, all that technology. They're going to be monitoring that. They're going to be looking at the events, determining if they need to be triaged, or if they're a real threat, or how to handle that. And then again, that flows right into the respond. So once an event is detected, that's when an incident management process kicks in, and you're analyzing those events. You're determining, how bad is the risk? Do we have a current breach? Is it isolated? How do we recover from this? And going through that entire process. Okay. Now, implementing this can be a challenge, as you can imagine. So again, it takes time. The first thing, though, is you really need to understand your scope. If you are just a provider of broadband services, then the scope is probably going to be your entire company, right? If you were say a municipality, you may have a separate environment that provides those broadband services from, say, other environments. So you may be able to separate those a little bit and have a separate scope. So that's going to be the first thing, is really understanding, what is in scope for our company based on your business and what you do, and then understanding what is your data, what's important, what systems are critical to your organization. And you can think about it simply: if you were to lose system A for 24 hours, what would that do to the company? Right? And you can help answer those questions. And, a simple way to go through this is a spreadsheet, just simply tracking and listing out your core applications, who owns them, your core assets and data. Again, it doesn't have to be super fancy, especially for smaller organizations. And then you really want to go through a risk assessment, is what we recommend. So before you start going out and purchasing technology or implementing, technical changes and all that, you really need to get an idea of what is the current state, right? So you can basically create what NIST refers to as a profile, right? So a current profile is essentially going to be, where are you at today? So if you were to do a gap assessment or an audit of what you have against the NIST framework, you're going to understand exactly where your critical issues are, and that's going to help you develop your plan, right? And then once you do that, you'll be able to identify and prioritize where you want to be. For some organizations, the next step is really then defining, where do we want to be? Because you're not going to go from, again, 0 to 100, in a month, right? This can take time. So if you have a lot of gaps and you have a lot of areas where you need to improve, you need to make a realistic assessment of what can we implement and what's the timeline for that. So maybe you have a 30-day plan for what you can change right away. And then it's maybe a 90-day plan, a year plan. And you just kind of develop that. And that also allows you to plan for your budget. It allows you to plan for staff and, how you're going to, assign tasks to people. And you can simply just start executing against that plan. But you can define that, 30-day to a year, type execution plan. And then once you're able to do that, you start implementing it. This could be everything from, implementing new policies that need to be done. Many organizations will have controls in place, right? So sometimes you may just need to tweak something you're already doing, and that could be a process, or maybe you have a product in place and you just need to make sure it's functioning correctly. That can help meet a control. And then you need to continually assess and adjust this, right? So what you define now may not be the same a year from now, right? So you need to regularly review the plan, what you've implemented against, how your progress is going, and make sure that it's evolving to address your risks. And then how can we help? So as we partner with Zquorum and many other of the subscribers out there, we've been able to really help them. And so what we did is we tried to break down some of the services that we offer specifically to the categories. So with the govern category, one of the first things we really recommend is a gap assessment, because again, how do you know what to implement until you really know where your gaps are? If you know, yes, I know I have a specific need for a technology, then that's fine. But I really wouldn't recommend going out and just start randomly purchasing products until you have a gap assessment, right?
Yeah.
You need to understand where you're at. We can help with that. We can help with policy creation. We also offer virtual CISO services. This can be good, especially for larger organizations that really need more time to implement policies and procedures and technology. So we can help guide that as well.
And what is CISO?
Say that again?
What is CISO?
A Chief Information Security Officer.
Got it. Okay.
So we also can do with the identify, asset discovery, penetration testing. So this, again, we can help you track all of the devices in your environment, help you do with the penetration testing that can help you understand where are our risks, what are our gaps. Also on penetration testing, NIST and most frameworks generally have a requirement for annual testing. So that's something you'll want to consider as well. I wouldn't recommend for most organizations to start with that right away, especially if you know there are gaps in your security. I would focus on, making some of the best practices, implementing some of those, then doing an assessment so that you can really test how well the products you've implemented actually respond right to that. From the protect section, we offer managed endpoint, managed data loss prevention, the 24/7 SOC, identity, email, really more of the traditional security services. Again, these are your more technical implementations and products that we can provide. And one of the benefits there is if we have managed endpoint and SOC, we can take proactive action. So our team can proactively detect a threat, isolate it, recover the machine from it, all without having to engage the client right away.
And this is all, everything we offer is available, kind of very flexible, where not everybody's going to need everything, right? So you can fill in where they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to your point, most companies aren't going to need everything. Chances are you may have some of this. But even if you didn't, trying to consume all of this and implement it quickly can be a challenge, right? So we want to kind of work with you over time to develop a plan, right? A plan that's going to be flexible for you, and that's also going to help you meet your goals around security and the BEAD funding or the ReConnect funding, but do it in a strategic process, right? We can tailor almost every one of these solutions specifically for the client's need, right? So some clients may not need managed endpoint because maybe they invested recently in a solution and they're comfortable with that, but they're not monitoring it 24/7, right? So with our SIM, we can bring those logs in, we can bring that in and start monitoring that. So we have a lot of flexibility there.
Great.
Yeah. With detection, again, this is vulnerability management. It's our 24/7 SOC. We offer managed deception. These are honeypots that can be placed throughout the network and are very good at detecting if an attacker has gained access. This can be really good on a subscriber network where maybe you're nervous about doing scanning or worried about potentially impacting the network. These are passive, so they're just going to be sitting there and can easily detect the threat inside that network. And then on the respond and recover, again, our SOC team will help respond to any threats that are detected. We will take proactive action, assuming we have the access to do that. And then we'll contact the client either through the ticketing system, or if it's critical enough, we'll make a phone call, wake someone up, that type of thing with the call tree. But we will help respond. We're not going to just send a ticket and say, hey, we saw some attack happen over there. No, we're going to isolate the machine. We're going to kill the connection, whatever it takes to, stop that attack the best possible. and then we will also help recover. So some of the tools we use actually have recovery functions built in. So we can, for example, changes made to an endpoint, we can roll those back, right? So we can make that change, get that system back to where it needs to be, and then the client can determine if they want to re-image it or replace it. It's up to them, but we will be able to help with some of that recovery functions and provide guidance for the clients on that.
And so you say SOC, Security Operations Center, but really it's, the way we describe it is Security Operations Center as a service, right?
It is. So it's our team. It's 24/7. And one of the big differences, with a SOC and a NOC is really the scope of what we're looking at, right? Our team are all security professionals. They're all trained. They're looking at things from a threat detection. They're not as concerned about whether it's up or down or, things like a NOC would. We're looking at it from that security perspective, right? Is somebody making a change they shouldn't? Why is this server connecting to, Zimbabwe, whatever, right? That's what we're looking at when we're monitoring these environments.
And by using that service, then their NOC team is freed up to do the NOC stuff. So they can take care of the things that they know and the things that are important on that side of the network. And then the Security Operations Center as a service is handled, and that team is looking at that.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. We work very closely with the teams, right? So we really strive to get to know our clients and to work very closely with them. And again, often we're able to spread the costs for this across multiple clients and generally come in at a better price point than if a client was to try to build this themselves.
Yeah.
So we can generally provide cost value there, as well as the expertise that you may not have in-house.
Yeah. Great.
And then this is just a little bit of the same thing, and talks a little bit about it. One thing is everything we do does map to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So we can directly map our services to that framework. So again, as you're going through the compliance, you'll be able to leverage our services to help you be compliant. Also, it's offered in a monthly subscription plan, so we don't require, large upfront expenditures to bring the service on, and it can be very cost effective.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's economies of scale. So for a company to try to build all of this on their own, and like I said earlier, just even the human resources involved in doing this is very expensive. So people can leverage this and get a good night's sleep knowing that somebody's watching the network. So endpoint detection and response. There's probably a lot of companies that you talk to that say, we've got it under control. So maybe they've got virus protection on their machines and they've got a firewall, like you said. But, endpoint detection response is a lot more sophisticated, right? It's not just looking at a defined, something that's already happened before, but it's looking for behavior. Is that right?
Exactly. It's really all behavior based. And this is really where most next generation products are going, right? It's no longer about a signature of a file or anything like that. This is solely behavior, and it gives you so much more details. Like we can show how a person downloaded a Word document through a browser, and then that Word document executed a PowerShell script that went out to another website and downloaded a file. Like it gets extremely granular into the activities that are happening on the machine, not just looking at, say, as a file, infected. Because the reality is most attackers now that are advanced are doing what we call living off the land. They're using built-in tools and software to gain access and to move laterally throughout the environment. So what you really want to look for is odd behavior, not necessarily that PowerShell is running, but what is PowerShell doing, for example. And that's where you're going to get that.
Good. Okay. So we're almost done here. So I forgot to mention early on, so I'm sorry about that. But anybody who's watching live, if you wanted to post a question on YouTube in the YouTube chat, feel free to do that. We'll be happy to answer that live now. We've only got a couple minutes. We won't hang around if we don't have any questions. But make sure you do that. And if you're watching it recorded, feel free to post a question on a comment on the video, because this will be at the same place and it'll be up there. So if you want to share this with somebody else, if you've found it and want to share it with some of your folks there, you just forward the video to them. But if you have a question, you can post that in the comment as well after we're done here. So, something you just mentioned there caught my attention again. So that a lot of times you think that an attacker gets in the network and then bam, things break. But quite often, and this is why it's so important to watch this behavior and have people watching it 24/7 and to know what they're looking for. That's very important. Is that somebody can get in there and they don't necessarily immediately take things down or make themselves known, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what most attackers are doing now, like if you use the ransomware attackers as an example, often they are gaining access. They are really exploring the network. They're copying data often out of the network first. So before anything gets encrypted, they will copy as much data out of the network as possible. Then they may try to execute encryption, of your machines. And the reason they're doing that is because more and more organizations are not paying the ransom. They're saying, well, I'm just going to restore everything. But then, well, I copied a terabyte of your customer data off the network. So if you don't pay me, I'm going to release that publicly. So now you have to worry about the reputational lawsuits, whatever that could look like. So often the attackers are not going to make themselves known right away. We've even heard of situations and seen where attackers knew what the policy limits were of the customer cybersecurity insurance, because they found it on the network. They were in the network share and they were like, oh, well, they have $1 million policy coverage. So then they, I say, well, we want $1 million. And the customer said, well, I don't have $1 million. They go, no, you do. Like, here's your policy, right? So, you want to, be prepared for that. And again, that's where having detection capabilities are so critical, not just focusing on, your perimeter, but even throughout your network, right? That's why we implement honeypots, for example, because an attacker will stumble across them and nobody should be interacting with them. So when you see that, right away, something's not right. So being able to detect breaches as soon as possible, and then being able to recover from that quickly is so important.
And, I think I asked this of you before. So, one thing that concerns me is artificial intelligence, because you were talking about, one of the things that people need to realize is that you don't always have these brilliant hackers out there that are doing all this. Unfortunately, there's a few brilliant hackers that then put this out there for other people to then use, these script kiddies that really don't have the technical knowledge to create these things, but there's they basically, it's hacking. They sell their services, right? Or they sell the ability to do that. So that's one thing. That's one reason it's so prevalent. I forgot what my second point was, but that's one of the key things, right? Is that it doesn't take a lot of knowledge to do this.
You have ransomware as a service now, right?
Yeah,
you have organizations where if I wanted to be an attacker, I can just sign up with them. I go out and attack people and try to do it, but I'm using all of their software, their techniques and all that. I don't have to know how to do any of that. I just got to find potential victims, and then we split the profits, right? So there is a lot of that going on. AI is going to be huge.
That was my first point, yeah.
Now, many of the products we use machine learning and machine learning algorithms, and they have been for many years. But what's new is you have adversarial AI. So you have a chat GPT, but for the bad guys, right? They're out there and you can access them. So I could say, create a very accurate phishing email to come from this person, right? And, they'll do it for you, right? Or write me software to exploit this vulnerability, and it will write the code that's needed to do that, right? So that's one thing you have to be aware of, is AI is good for both the defense, but the bad guys are using it as well, to give them greater scale.
Yeah, and that's another reason to partner with experts that are staying on top of this and the latest technology, because I think, you could go ahead and buy things and implement them, and who knows, they could be obsolete in a very short period of time based on just the spy versus spy kind of thing going on here.
Yeah, and I come from a very technical background. I love products, right? But at the same time, I know that if the product's not configured right, it's not going to perform as it should.
Right. Yeah.
And so we see that often too, where organizations purchase a product, but it never gets fully implemented, right? So, you know, if you're investing in technology, you have to, of course, but you got to make sure it's implemented right, that you're continually reviewing it, you're keeping it up to date. You know, we found situations during assessments where they had default passwords on their endpoint security or no password, and we could literally just uninstall it.
Ah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, it's just, you know, so you have to be thinking about all of that.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully this was helpful for everybody. Again, this really applies to you if you're an internet service provider. Certainly if you're going to be getting any new federal funding is going to have this. And like I said, you know, in a year or two, it's probably going to apply to all ISPs anyway. And again, it just makes sense for your business. So if this woke you up a little bit, if it's making you a little anxious, don't worry. We're here to help. We can answer questions for you. So again, just drop something in the YouTube comment there, and you see our email address, phone number, web address. If you go to zcorm.com and look for cybersecurity up in the menu there, you'll see everything that we have to offer, which is all backed up by Travis and his team. So make sure you reach out there. Yeah, don't be concerned. And again, if you haven't started this yet, and you're worried that, you know, you've got some deadline coming up, you know, you at least need to get started. As Travis was saying, get that plan started so that you've got that part done, and then we can help you fill in the blanks wherever needed. Travis, I really appreciate your time today. As always, it's been very, very educational.
Yep. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for joining.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I know we've got some that were on live, and I know we'll have a bunch of other people that are going to be joining by the recorded video later. So again, if you have any questions, reach out to us right there. You'll see it on the screen. If you like this video, if it was helpful for you, if you would give it a like, I'd appreciate that. And go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Click the subscribe button, ring the bell next to that, and you'll get a notification whenever I am live almost every day with some kind of broadband topic. So hope to see you in the future. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Travis, and I will see everyone else soon. Take care. Bye-bye.